All right, everybody. Hey, it was just sorry. That was just me talking to in the next window.
Presenting Benny Goodman
There we
and his
go.
music.
And now I've started over here. Okay, hey everybody. All right, let me get this one rigged up properly. Heck. Oh my heck. Evening, Sarah, Denise, Martin, Octavio, Timothy, Larry, Timothy, Donna, Luann. Hey, Georgia. Hey, Katie. Hey, Gene.
Benny Goodman
Sarah, I don't expect to lose power.
Howard clarinet
We've had a lot of rain, but that's about it.
who purveys assorted rhythms, all danceable, in the urban room of the
Well, yeah, you never
Congress
know.
in Chicago. And first of all, one of Irving Berlin's
Well, we're
greatest
getting some
hits,
glare here.
Blue Skies.
That's better. Hey, Carolyn. Hey, Linda and LaSalle. Hey, Gene. Hey, Sylvia. Hey, Miguel. Hey, Bruce. Did anybody just come over from Mandy's? Is her power still going? Mandy might not be done yet. Hey, Megan. Hey, Gene in Massachusetts. Hey, Dad. Megan and all the fellow Mysterians. Hey, Jerry. Hey, Susan. Hey, Bridget. All right, Mandy just got done. Good, her power stayed up. Excellent. Hey, Avi. Miles was up and hanging around in the last one. Hey, happy birthday, Eileen. Evening, Chris. And hey, everybody. Hey, Laura, glad you're back. Hey, Sherry. West Branch. Is that the one in Iowa, Jan? I've been through there for the Herbert Hoover stuff. Tell you what, that's crowded. No, it's not crowded. Even Danielle in Edgewater. Hey, Mary. Hey, Kathy from Arkansas. Yeah, I've been hearing about the bad icing. I was just telling Mandy and Layla about this ice storm we had in Iowa back in 1990. In my memory, it all happened while I was at school. I remember the power went out in the school, and it seems like after we left, nothing was really going on except everything was covered in like an inch of ice. It was really pretty cool. Plus, we didn't have school for 2 days, and at the end of it, we went to see Back to the Future 2 when the power came back on. The End by Adam Seltzer. Evening, grandkids galore in Wisconsin. Good luck on your power. Because nowadays, when your power comes back on, you can't go to Billy Joe's to see Back to the Future 2. Just realized I just did one for the Winnetka Library. I was still finishing it up when this one started. Hey, Aaron and Ryder.
Benny Goodman presents Helen Ward.
Now we're about to talk about all the murders that used to happen in Winnetka. With a buried with the wrong head rate of 200 people per 100,000 in the 1880s, which is awfully high. Some other Billy Joe's Picture Show fans. That was the theater in Des Moines that showed second-run movies plus Rocky Horror with like tables and chairs and table service. When I went in like 2000, you could still smoke in the theater at Rocky Horror. Blizzard in Los Angeles, huh? Yeah, Priya just heard meowing over there. I heard somebody meowing. Hey, June. Hey, Grandma Belle. My heart, I say I love you dearly, for I am yours sincerely, all my heart. Oh yeah, I should have thrown in the Wilson murder for the Graceland presentation for Winnetka. Just, hey, here's your big murder victims. Guys, I gotta let you know, as of today, I am 1 day older than Elvis lived to be. It's not my birthday, just in terms of years, months, days. Every clip I ever see of Elvis from here on out, he's younger than me. Hey, Florecita. The library talk went pretty well, I think. "39 states affected by this storm." That's a lot of states. We're only getting rain here. It's not really that bad. Maybe glad that works. Once again, thanks to everybody who's still hitting these donate buttons over here or joining up on Patreon. Ah, that's why you thought it was my birthday. No, it was goes straight up to the days. He lived to be 42 years, 9 months, and 9 days or something. I'm up to 10 days now.
Benny Goodman goes way back and gets
Or 8 days, and I'm up to 9. One of those.
Benny Goodman and his orchestra.
We'll give it a minute or so for everybody to get online. Yeah, I just pulled up the 1990 Des Moines Registers to look at the ice storm coverage. Like, one guy was arrested for firing off a pistol. He was shooting at tree branches, trying to get them down. Kind of makes sense. One guy reported that he was in the middle of watching a movie when the power went out, including the VCR. He says that if anybody can tell me what happens after Michael Caine runs up the stairs, please let me know. Yep, older than I look, yep. I will, in fact, live long and prosper, Judy. I remember the ice storm being pretty fun, really. I mean, in my memory, it happened entirely while I was at school. When we came outside, everything was like coated in ice, but I don't remember it still raining on us. The only time I ever remember power going out at school. I was in 3rd grade. It was kind of an adventure. We'll let Benny finish up this tune. Hey, Kristen. Thanks to all the people who say I don't look 42. I did just get carded buying a bottle of bourbon. Laura, it was kind of around St. Patrick's Day.
And they all loved it. They all loved those bastards when they played by Benny Goodman. And now another one just in the same vein, Rosetta.
All right, another one in the same vein, Rosetta, but not for us. We will be back to Benny at the end of the program. And for now, welcome along, everybody. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago Tours. Been a tour guide and historian here in Chicago for going on 40 years. Going on 20 years now. I was not a tour guide when I was 2. Probably would have been an okay one, but I wasn't. Author of such books as Mysterious Chicago, the book, H.H. Holmes, The True History of the White City Devil, Murder Maps USA, new from Thames and Hudson, the now rare Ghosts of Chicago, and Graceland Cemetery, Chicago Stories, Symbols, and Secrets, and tying into all of these things, my novel Just Kill Me, all about a ghost tour guide who makes places more haunted by killing people at them. It's more or less a true story. Really. But today we're going to be talking about a kind of an alternate version of the ghost tours. I've been doing ghost tours. Really, I got my start in Chicago tourism working for ghost tours about 20 years ago. And there's some of them that I always would have loved to put up, but never really could just because they were out of geographical range of going on a bus tour. So one of the fun things about doing virtual tours is that we're not bound by geography. So there once was a time when Sheridan Road up here on the north side was known as the Street of Mysteries. It's like everywhere you drove down Sheridan Road, a carriage driver would tell you, here's where this murder happened, here's where this ghost haunts, here's where this ghost haunts, here's where this murderer lives. And this showed up a couple of times. There was this article from 1902. And there had been another one way back in 1896 showing all of these wild stories. So what we're going to do over the course of the day is cover quite a number of the ones that were covered in these articles, as well as a few that just happened too late to be included there. So welcome along, everybody. I just talked about Graceland for the Winnetka Library. If anybody popped on over, here's some more stuff about your area. We're going to start right on the edge of the North Shore, just over the line from Chicago and into Evanston. Well, right here, we were just here at Calvary Cemetery the other day. We got to go back soon to find Hinky Dink Kenna properly. We found him before, but we couldn't find him again. That rascally Hinky Dink. So welcome along, those of you just joining us. But this is said to be the domain of a ghost by the name of Seaweed Charlie. It is said to be a guy dressed in a long coat, like a military coat, who would climb out of the water, up through these rocks, and cross the road into the cemetery, all covered in seaweed. It was a popular story around the 1960s and 1970s in particular. I don't know if there's been a more recent sighting than that, but it was generally said to have been a pilot, perhaps one of the ones doing training over the lake during World War II or thereabouts, who had died in a plane wreck. And there was at least one of those. There was a guy by the name of Laverne Neighbors, who was doing maneuvers in 1951 out of the Glenview Naval Air Force Base in an FH-1 Phantom. Crashed into the lake not too far from Northwestern University, so a little ways north of where we are right here. And he was able to get up onto the wings of the plane and wave for help, but was eventually drowned. And has generally been considered that he's probably the ghost that would become Seaweed Charlie, though he's not buried in Calvary or anything. I think people are sort of overlooking the idea that there could be somebody else too, because in addition to just him dying, several other people drowned while trying to salvage his plane days later. The body was found about a month afterwards. And given that his name was Laverne, one might reasonably ask, why do we call him Seaweed Charlie? Well, why do we call Resurrection Mary Resurrection Mary? The ghost doesn't stop to give us actual details. We have to fill them in on our own. There's a couple of things around here at Calvary Cemetery, too. There's also the issue that back in the turn of the 20th century, there was still one private burial ground within the city outside of the Sacred Heart and the Holy Family Parish. I'll move this over away from me a little bit. There was a convent over on Taylor Street, the Convent of the Sacred Heart. When they moved it, they dug up the private cemetery. These were semi-cloistered nuns who weren't allowed to leave for something so frivolous as a cemetery. So they were all just buried on the grounds. It was the last place you could do that legally in Chicago. But when they moved up to the north side, they found that 2 of the nuns had turned into stone. And I don't mean that they had gotten really heavy and frozen. It said it was like they were marble. And down below here, even in the newspaper article about it, and this is specifically Mother Galway, one of the two, it was said, you can see whenever the composition of an organic body has begun, blah. Even then they thought there were probably scientific explanations. But most of the things around here say that they were moved to Calvary Cemetery, but finding out exactly where they are has proven inconclusive. In any case, nobody seems to be able to find the plot where that order was moved to. So we'll move up just a little ways here and on into Wilmette. We'll get back to Evanston in a little bit. But you got to play the hits right up at the beginning, you know. Get your brand established. This is a house in Wilmette, or a space in Wilmette where there used to be a house. Right about where this driveway is now, on John Street, I believe, was originally the site of the Wilmette home of H.H. Holmes, the Devil in the White City guy. Now, built in 1893, officially the name of the owner on the paperwork was Minnie Williams, his girlfriend, though ostensibly this was built for his wife Myrta, her mother Lucy, and he and Myrta's daughter, also named Lucy. Now, this was built in 1893 using borrowed labor and borrowed material from the Weber Laban Brick Company, none of whom ever got paid. But when they tried to sue Minnie Williams, they had a lot of trouble finding her because she disappeared in the summer of 1893, around the time that this was built. Now, there were a lot of rumors about it for a while there, that this might have been built just like Holmes' famous murder castle, full of secret passages and hidden rooms. Really, I'd say that if Holmes spent cumulatively an entire month here, it's probably as much as he did. The place was built in the summer of 1893. He was still mostly living around Chicago at the time. Early 1894, he split the scene and never came back to Chicago after that, except like a really brief stop off in late 1894. So I don't think he really spent a whole lot of time in this location. But he did say nice things about Wilmette, and was occasionally on the north side. And was here enough that people started to wonder if maybe he had been the killer of the Crone murder of 1893. Right around the same time this was started up. So we're going to move down the road here just a little ways down. Just a couple of blocks south on Lake Avenue. There was a house owned by a guy by the name of Frank Wheeler, who lived here with his mother-in-law, Mrs. Crone, in 1893. And I haven't been able to figure out exactly what the address of it was at the time. I think it was just a rural route. They didn't have a specific address. It was just on Lake Avenue. But it would have been approximately here. And this might even be the same house. I can't really tell. Here's it from the side. And here's the picture of it. It would have been redone for sure. But in any case, there was a guy here by the name of Frank Wheeler. Found a burglar in his house and shot him dead. But before shooting him, he saw that his mother-in-law, Mrs. Crone, was lying in a pool of blood. There were bite marks on the dead guy's hand, which showed clear sign of a struggle. He chased two other burglars out of the place, but they got away. And when he came back, he found that the house was on fire. By the time the fire ended, all they ever found were a couple of charred bits of bones. So this new house would have been built here right after that. This would have been the rebuilt residence, as you can see. But there were still a lot more fires. It came up in the news for catching fire quite a lot after this. I guess the burglars didn't realize that burglars on the North Shore tend to come to no good end. After all. That was in Winnetka, of course. This is Mrs. Mary Crone. Now, they never did figure out who these killers were. Frankly, the whole thing strikes me as suspicious. The whole notion that there even was a burglar, we know strictly because Frank Wheeler said so. Once again, all of the evidence immediately burned down. But there's a very interesting drawing that came about in one of the papers at the time, showing a diagram, the whole plan of the front floor, showing the bedroom where Mr. Wheeler's room, then the mother-in-law room right across the street, with even a drawing of the outline of where the body was found. That's not something I find very often here. Also, while we're on the subject of the North Shore, there was also, not too far, right about across the street from the depot, was Van Geem's paint store, above which a Methodist congregation met. This is where H.H. Holmes and his wife went to church. This is the Devil's Church, you might say. But finding some of the exact locations of where these things were and whether the building is original or not is a little bit harder in Wilmette than it is in Chicago. The data just isn't quite as clear. And for any story like this, you want to get as much data as you can, because sometimes the way that the story survives is not really the way that the story happened. Good case in point is down here in Evanston. Fall of 1896, right around this location, newspapers all over the country ran stories that a woman by the name of Mrs. Parker had been having dreams that there was a skeleton buried nearby. And after one bad dream, she had her husband do some digging. He didn't find anything. But shortly thereafter, she had an even worse dream, had him dig again, and that time he found some bones, what appeared to be two women. And at first they thought, well, this is, that H.H. Holmes guy was just hanged a couple of months ago. Maybe these are some of his victims. There are quite a few that they never did find. So this was national news that they had found this skeleton buried, and this was retold in all of those later Sheridan Road articles. Wilmette's grave history, bones in a hole. But here's the thing, is that most of the Chicago papers didn't really cover this. Like the Chicago Tribune and the Chicago Inter-Ocean didn't really seem to care very much about it. But the Chicago Record covered it. And the local version was a little bit different. It's kind of like a game of telephone. And all of the nationally syndicated versions is always that she was having dreams for weeks. The more local version was that she had a premonition. Something told her that something was buried there. Her husband did just a little digging and found something right away. So this made the news. Reporters all gathered around and they pulled out what appeared to be a human skull from the thing. But by the end of the day, after they had already put out the story about the skull, the whole thing kind of fell apart. Turns out that they were bones of a horse. And recently there was a guy named Detective White. A newspaper reporter had just criticized him for being a really bad shot. Kind of a common theme in newspapers of the day, people complaining that cops can't really shoot straight. They're like, stormtrooper level shooting badly. So Detective White, when he saw this was going on, before the reporters could get there, saw immediately from looking into the pit that these were just horse bones. So he managed to acquire a human skull from a medical student over at Northwestern and plant it there just to make the reporter look bad. The skull was later sent to a frat house. I have no idea if they still have it. And of course, we just when I was talking about Grave Robbing 101, we talked about the story of that they have Geronimo's skull at the Skull and Bones tomb in Yale. Like, sure, I'm sure it's his real skull. Yeah, sure. But when the story got retold a few years later, this all happened in 1896, in those early stories, this comes up in both of these big articles, neither of which seem to remember the fact that it turned out just to be horse bones. This is kind of how these stories work. They get debunked, but people only remember the wildest versions. Same thing with H.H. Holmes, in fact. We're going to move up the road a little bit. There's all these cool streets up here that are still kind of brick. I got one little riot, my mom got scared. Horse skulls look like human skulls. That's interesting. I wouldn't have bet on that. Is Pullman making trouble for you guys or what? There's something weird going on with the sound. I'm just seeing something in the comments over here. I'll just scroll back a little bit. All right, get out of the comments. Yes, Kristen. Okay, so up here at Ashland and Sheridan, not to be confused with the same Ashland down in Chicago, just down the road from here was a kind of a country club way back in the day. And one day in September of 1903, people who were heading there reported that right here at about Sheridan and Ashland, they were seeing a busted carriage by the side of the road. So they would go over to help this carriage and see inside of it, there was a body wrapped in a winding sheet. It appeared to be the body of a woman wrapped in a burial shroud. Everybody agreed that it was a woman. They would help the person and they would drive away. But then the next person coming along would see the same thing and also help the person. Apparently this carriage with a dead person in it was just appearing and disappearing. Now normally this is the kind of story, folklore-wise, if you help somebody move a dead body, you get richly rewarded or something. I guess these guys were already rich, so they were just kind of continuing to pay their dues. People were so freaked out by it, they called all of the funeral homes and said, hey, was somebody delivering a body? People were wondering, hey, could this have just been a murder or something? I don't think you usually wrap a murder victim up in a shroud. But this became front page news for about a day. There never was a really big explanation for it that covered everything from it. Well, the kind of thing that made front page news. But now we're moving into Kenilworth, which is kind of a pocket community in between Wilmette and Winnetka. Like, even fancier. But this is the Kenilworth Railroad Station. You know, a couple of those early articles talk about a guy by the name of William Lamport. He was said to be an early prominent resident who poisoned himself to death and was living in a house right around here, took poison, came out here, and in his death throes, as he thrashed around and writhed, tried to tear up all of the grass by hand. Then it was said for years after that the places where he had torn up the grass, nobody was ever able to grow any grass again. I couldn't find a bare patch after that, so it may be one of those curses that just didn't last forever. I also could not find any documentation about William Lamport himself. But it's only in one or two articles, so it may just be that they have his name a little bit wrong. I couldn't quite find anything to back this one up. It's not for lack of looking. But one other thing up here in Kenilworth is up at the church they have one solitary grave in the middle of the churchyard. This guy was originally a Graceland. But this is Eugene Field, the poet. He is best known nowadays for Wynkin', Blynkin', and Nod. He was known as the poet of childhood for a long time. But of course, around here, we've got in Rogers Park, we've got a school named after him, both I think two of them, like Field and Newfield. But he has this whole churchyard all to himself. He was just that well regarded and that famous in his day. He was a newspaper humorist. He wrote children's poetry. He also wrote some maudlin poetry. And of course, we usually bring him up around here because he also wrote some really dirty poetry. In particular, there was one called Socratic Love, the last line of which is said by the Oxford English Dictionary to be the first use of the word poop in its modern noun and verb form. We're not doing an after-hours tour, so I won't go into all of the details. He also wrote a wonderful poem about it smelling his wife's farts, one about his kid wetting the bed. I just find this absolutely charming myself, that even if you tell even if you're the guy who first uses the word poop, writing really dirty stories, you can still end up being regarded as so righteous that you get a whole churchyard all to yourself. Personally, I just think that is spectacular. But from here, we'll continue moving up a little ways. And on into Tower Park in Winnetka. Let's take a quick look off at the tower here and see our relation to the lake. It's known as Tower Park because there used to be a really big tower here. Now, a lot of people now mistake it for being the lighthouse that you can see off in the distance over here. But no, it wasn't the same tower. There used to be just a big regular one here. We used to have a picture of it, did we? Yeah, you can see it off in the distance there. So, one day back right around where we would be now, right around by the beach, some kids were playing on the beach and found a human head. Now, they ran off to report it. By the time anybody came back, it had already been swept into the water by the time anybody decided to come back and hold an inquest. But a couple of months later, a dead body was found, immaculately dressed in fine German clothes, but missing his head. Now, he was clean. Now, it was a clean cut on the neck. It wasn't like he had lost his head in a struggle. Most likely, this was a case where they had cut off the guy's head so that the body would not be identified. That's usually why they cut off heads after bodies, at least according to Ichabod Crane in the Tim Burton version of Sleepy Hollow. He had been once they found the body, they hastily buried him right in the middle of town. We'll move over here to Hubbard Woods Park. It was always described as they found the body in Hubbard Woods at the time. This is the grand suburban tradition of naming things after what used to be there. They've built Hubbard Woods Park where the woods used to be. You can also see the shop where Kevin McAllister steals a toothbrush from Home Alone is right there. He then goes like falling through the ice right in the middle of this park. So they found the body here and initially just buried the body right about here, right in the middle of town. And other people were rather annoyed that they decided not to investigate just because it smelled so bad. I'll move over to the side here. Particular one. Where the headless body was found, over by the tower. Now, people were just kind of shocked about the fact that they hadn't really done anything with it, so eventually they dug it back up, noted again how much it smelled. It turned out they hadn't even bothered to look through the clothes because it smelled so bad. When they looked through it, they didn't find anything particularly identifying, but they matched it up with a cadaver's head that had been found on the south side a couple of weeks before. It almost certainly was not the proper head, but had it buried out in Dunning. And the newspapers were so busy making references to how deeply unpleasant it must have been for whoever was driving that smelly carriage that they didn't really bother to wonder. It's like, hey, isn't it probably not the right head? So the murder remained unsolved. This read a lot of some interesting writing that are in the paper. Was probably anxious to create a sensation at the people of Winnetka, and alluding to the finding of a headless corpse near this village, he says, "The people are very inhuman or indisposed about this region. About 2 months ago, a man's head was discovered in the lake, and no one thought of enough of a matter to get head of, or hold the head, or hold a coroner's inquest, or decently buried. And such barbarity did not stop there, for the body which is found could not even have a place in the potter's field." It was by then in the potter's field. But yeah, the people in Winnetka were inhuman, according to this. But because of articles like this, they dug it back up. Eventually, they managed to trace it. Apparently, the body was that of a guy by the name of Ignaz Hopf, who was the mayor of a small town in Germany. Though there were a couple of other suggestions. I would say the ID is not exactly It's not exactly clear, not exactly proven, but I'm definitely assuming that he got buried with the wrong head. And I hate it when that happened. There were so few people in Winnetka at the time, that makes for a rate of 200 people per 100,000 getting buried with the wrong head in Winnetka in those days. But naturally, this came to be a place that was said to be haunted. The headless ghost was said to walk around all over this place. This means he would be wandering exactly the terrain where the Home Alone house now stands. So I hope he's watching out for like red-hot doorknobs and swinging paint cans. Those are only so much good against a ghost. According to that one show, they don't like rock salt. So there's a tip for you, Kevin. Like, yeah, we found you ahead. Come on. Let's just move down the road a little ways here. I haven't done 2 tours in a row in a long time. My voice is definitely feeling it. Make our way down the steps here, down onto the beach. I could do a whole tour about headless stories too. I should do a whole tour of headless stories. Be really poor taste. I love it. But all right, this is said to be the site where the ghost of Annie Russell walks. Now, both of those early stories talk about the ghost of Annie Russell, who is said to be the belle of the north suburbs, the most beautiful girl in town. She had many suitors, but only wanted one of them. And when that suitor rejected her, she walked down to these bluffs, just like we just walked down, out onto the pier, and threw herself into the water. And ever since then, her ghostly form was seen walking up and down the pier, wringing her hands. This was said to be a very common date thing, to go down and walk on the bluff and say that you were looking for the ghost of Annie Russell. And this is another one where I can't find any historical source on this. Both of the newspaper articles about the ghost give the same name for the person, but they don't really give a date, and I haven't really found anything to back it up. The fact that they both use the same name is something. It means at least they have both heard the same story. But whether there was ever an Annie Russell who was the belle of the North Side, there should really be a little bit more data about that. but I haven't been able to find it so far. But I love this. Love led Annie Russell down this path to death. Now, if anybody's seen her ghost lately, I don't know about it. Not in the last century or so. But just around here on the beach, also, we can go down about the same space. Up until about the early 20th century, you could still go play on the wreckage of a shipwreck from one of the worst ship disasters in American history. It was back in 1860. It was a ship called the Lady Elgin that was sailing from Milwaukee to Chicago. It sometimes said that they were going to see Stephen Douglas give a speech. It's not exactly true. I remember I looked it all up and I had better data about it for a while, but exactly what they were doing is kind of unclear. But there were a lot of people on board. But storm clouds and bad visibility. In other words, it was a night just like tonight. Now, in the process of this bad visibility, they ended up colliding with another ship, and the ship sank in half an hour. Now, most of the survivors' bodies and debris also were swept down to Winnetka. Some bodies were still washing ashore clear down on the south side of Chicago. Eventually, about 300 people were thought to have been killed by this. Most of them were buried in a cemetery that was set up specifically for it in Highwood, kind of in between Winnetka and Highland Park. But by 1899, almost 40 years after it had happened, it was already said to be neglected and wrecked by cows, marked only by a couple of wooden stakes. And within a year after that, people were saying, hey, does anyone remember where that cemetery was? It was just lost for years and years. Now, the Highwood Historical Society had a newsletter out a while back saying that they had found where it was, but now their newsletter is no longer online. So as far as I know, it's, for all practical purposes, lost again. 27 unmarked bodies, unclaimed bodies, and unidentified bodies were buried at Rose Hill Cemetery. The management finally found for me where that was supposed to be, but they kind of suspect they didn't actually bury anybody there. They just kind of said that they did because it made them look good. Now, cemeteries were not above doing strange things for publicity in those days. But this is actually from about the early 20th century, kids playing on the remains of the Lady Elgin that eventually walked up. And there was at least a drawing from 1899 showing about what it would have looked like. And from this one probably could triangulate about where the burial ground would have been. But there was a witness to the whole thing by the name of Henry Mowers, who said that there were quite a lot of ghost stories about it, especially as buildings started going up around this area. People started telling ghost stories. In particular, there was a woman wearing a black dress who is said to be dripping with water, wearing a gold necklace and waving her arms like she was trying to keep people away from the place. Now, Henry Mowers, who was on the beach the day of the wreck, said that days afterwards, the body of a woman dressed in black had washed up in Winnetka. He said that she was wave-tossed and beach-beaten, but you could tell that she was beautiful. She was wearing a gold chain and gold rings. So they locked the body into a nearby building until officials could decide what to do, until they could arrive. But when they did, Mowers noticed that her jewelry disappeared from her body. And days later, he saw her chain around the neck of a prominent local woman, the wife of a Lake County official. He didn't name names. But with the jewelry gone, that's probably why the body couldn't be identified. After that, there was no easily identifiable marks. A lot of bodies in situations like this would have been identified based on their jewelry. Mr. Mowers himself made a coffin, and she was buried with the others somewhere here in the Lost Cemetery in Highwood, and presumably would be the person who shows up trying to wave people away. Now, you might remember a lot of the people also were buried up at that cemetery in Milwaukee. Mandy Crypt and I went up there and tried to find a monument that was supposed to be to them, but really we couldn't find a specific monument, just an awful lot of graves that said Lost on Lady Elgin. Yeah, Desolate Garden of Death. That was Nicole's nickname in high school. Very low to steal from a chorus. People were known to do it, though. All right. We'll also check out one more town out here in Winnetka. And this is why they were calling it Murder Town. I'll go up to right around here. This place has been a couple of different places. But in 1884, right around here in Winnetka by the railroad tracks, would have been the home of the Wilsons. James and Clarissa. Now, James Wilson, a local official in 1884, was a businessman and a painter. Every week he would go down into Chicago to get supplies. He was married to a woman named Clarissa, who was, I believe, quite a bit older than him, and he was no young man himself at the time. Clarissa was a political junkie. Now, one time somebody brought her a present wrapped in the Chicago Times, and she threw the whole present into the fire because it had been touched by the Chicago Times. I love this woman. The Chicago Times was the most horribly racist paper in Chicago. But by the time of 1884, it was said that she had kind of lost her mind. There were stories about her hoarding eggs because she believed that they were made of gold. So people had to look after her. James was there most of the week, but once a week on Wednesdays, a neighbor would come to keep her company while James went down into Chicago. Then one day she came back and found that the door was locked. So she went in, and down in the first section, she found James Wilson. As you see, not a young man himself here. But he was dead behind the stove. He had been shot and beaten and left behind there. Meanwhile, up in the upstairs room, that's just a pile of clothes, not Mrs. Wilson herself, but Mrs. Wilson had been stabbed with her late son's Civil War sword. And one old Winnetka book said it was just a lingering effect of 1619. Slavery was brought to the United States. Eventually there was a war about that slavery, and then the weapon from that war was used to murder someone as late as 1884. They're kind of stretching. I don't really think the person actually needed that sword to do this. Now, there wasn't really a good suspect for any of this stuff. They didn't have any particular enemies. The closest was there was a guy by the name of McKeague, a butcher, who was about the only witness. He had said the day before, Mr. Wilson had come into his butcher shop saying, I need a bunch of meat. I've got a friend I haven't seen in years coming over tonight, and I want to give him a good meal, and also deliver me some steaks in the morning. Now, this guy also owed Mr. Wilson some money. But that doesn't really explain this level of brutality. They decided it was him just because a lack of any other ideas. But he was brought to trial, and there simply wasn't really any explanation for it. Nowadays we might be able to tie it to him. There were a couple of buttons found at the scene that they thought might have been his. There was a bloody handprint on the wall. The kind of thing that nowadays we could probably explain, but he was acquitted at the time, decided to leave town, and a couple of years later he was shot to death over a card game in Churches Ferry, North Dakota. Churches Ferry, North Dakota sounds like the kind of town that only exists so people can get shot to death in a card game there. Now, there were vague stories about this place being haunted for years after that, and also stories that the bloody handprint never disappeared. That's a very common focal motif, the blood stain that never disappeared, and I've seen it happen myself once or twice. Years of stories about that place being haunted. It gave Winnetka a reputation as the murder town for a long time. And this was only a couple of years after they found that headless body around there. So this would be, a town of a few hundred has a few people getting murdered. That's an awfully high murder per capita rate. But also not too far from here is the Henry Lloyd home. Couldn't get a better shot of it than this. But this was occupied by a journalist, built in 1855, later occupied by a journalist whose son was the founder of the Communist Labor Party. Henry Lloyd believed that his house was occupied by a little old lady ghost who went all over the place, didn't really bug the family much. But then when they eventually moved across the street, the ghost just followed them across the street. But not as much, they said. She still showed up, but not as much in the new place. Guess she just didn't like the new house as much. And since we're just on the north side, I've got a couple of north side filler things in here. I'm not quite to 840 yet. Let's go ahead and cover also on Sheridan Road. This is down into the Chicago portion of Sheridan Road, but still Sheridan Road. This is currently a lawyer's office, but it used to be a funeral home where John Dillinger's funeral was held. Now, in 1934, John Dillinger was one of the most famous bank robbers in the country. There were starting to be folk tales that he was robbing from the rich to give to the poor. which he absolutely was not. But in 1934, people would believe pretty much anything nasty they heard about Banks, and not without good reason either. Eventually, he was captured outside of the Biograph Theater, not really so much captured as assassinated. The FBI tried to say for a while that it had been a shootout, not just a straight-up shooting on their part. They even tried to display the gun that he had on him. The gun they put on display had not been manufactured yet at the time of all of this. But this is when they were when they redid the whole block to film the movie Public Enemies that was all about Dillinger. You see on the Biograph, they even have the marquee of Manhattan Melodrama, the movie that Dillinger saw at the Biograph Theater just before the FBI shot him in the alley nearby. It's not a good movie. It opens with something kind of like the Eastland disaster. There was a ship that tips over. We get a long shot of Mickey Rooney crying that he's an orphan now. An old guy takes him in. The old guy is promptly trampled by a horse in a labor dispute, so we get another long shot of Mickey Rooney crying that he's an orphan now. To paraphrase Oscar Wilde, you would have to have a heart of stone to see this movie and not laugh. Eventually, the kid grows up. There's a whole Clark Gable gangster story. It's really impossible to imagine that Dillinger would have been so riveted by it as to not notice all of the agents coming and going from the place. But they redid the whole area. This is the alley where he would have been shot. And here's the picture of him at the morgue. That is his arm under the sheet. But this photograph led to the legend of Dillinger's ding-a-ling. They say about once a month at the Smithsonian, somebody asks about, isn't it true that you got Dillinger's 1-foot-long penis on display in here someplace? I'm sure that would be better now. I guess nowadays people can Google that before they show up at the Smithsonian, so they probably don't get it as much anymore. But his body was taken from the morgue to that funeral home that we just saw a second ago down on Sheridan Road, continuing the mysteries of Sheridan Road. But someplace in between the morgue and the funeral home, nobody really knows where, but his brain was stolen. And I love the headline here. John Dillinger's brain now resting in pieces. And just one thing is sure, outlaws still dead. This was an article. The headlines were usually written by somebody other than the person who wrote the article, but the article itself was written by Kay Hall, one of the women who wrote for the Daily Times. She wrote a lot of really interesting stuff. We've covered her over on the Patreon quite a few times. Also, her husband wrote in this great letter talking about how he had seen this place in Minneapolis called Mickey's Dunking Hour. It encouraged you to dunk your donuts into coffee. He thought, that's brilliant. It's so comforting. It's so nice. It's so much fun. There should be places where you can dunk your donuts in coffee in every city. Like, yeah. And the response was like, yeah, you got any other winners for us? If only we'd listened. But all right, everybody. So next week, I haven't quite done all of the stuff to put the event page up, but next week we're going to be continuing Wednesday for a couple more weeks. There's still a couple of Chicago for Chicagoans lectures that I want to be checking out myself, for one thing. Wednesday, March 1st, next week, we'll be doing Strange Tales of the Gold Coast. And also coming soon, I've got some meetings coming up about this. We're going to be doing the Mysterious Chicago Dinner Series that I know everybody is excited about, as I am. So yeah, lots of stuff still coming up here. We'll do a surprise tour on Sunday morning, just like usual. And should you need a Mysterious Chicago sweatshirt, hoodie, etc., you can be cool just like Luca. No, you can't be as cool as Luca, but you can try by going to cafepress.com/mysteriouschicago. So, all right, everybody, thanks a lot for joining me. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago Tours. From here, we will put on the Benny Goodman and just hang out like we always do. So thanks a lot for joining me, everybody. Still got to highly recommend the Patreon as the best bang for your buck. I came up with so many good stories that I couldn't wait to tell on the Patreon just over the course of research for last week's adventure about lost vice districts. So thanks a lot for joining me. And here once again is Benny Goodman coming to you live from the Congress Hotel in downtown Chicago. I really got to get the shawls going. Oh yeah, those of you who haven't been here in a while, we're working on some events coming up where we're going to be recreating historical Chicago restaurants and hangouts. We've got a chef who's working on recipes. We're going to have all kinds of fun. There's just a lot of details to iron out with stuff like this about cost, licensing, locations, etc. I don't know, let me see if Cafe Press lets me make a shawl. Thanks, Ryan/Lori, for that donation. Marilyn, right now there is not information about the dinners, but we'll keep you posted. We're still trying to figure out all of the data about that. Nicole, the Lady Elgin happened in 1860. And at the time, there was a lot of talk with the Rose Hill space, like there should really be a big monument for this. But then the Civil War got started. Oh yeah, this has been messing me up on what day of the week it is too, for sure. Thank you, Chuck. Paula, I have just been drinking Trader Joe's water with lime all night, but now I believe it is in fact time to switch to some bourbon. What kind of bourbon have I got out? Well, I got some Z31, my favorite. Though I did just get a 10-year Heaven's Door bourbon. And got carded, thank you very much. John wants to know some mysterious facts for the iceberg he's making. What sort of iceberg is this that involves facts? And what's Mindy sending me about Skyhorse Publishing?
Hotel in downtown Chicago. And now Benny Goodman's arrangement of The Bugle Call Rang.
Hey, my book is included in a true crime bundle. I authorize no such thing, but I don't suppose, no. Bourbon tasting at Mystericon. We could also do some of those with the dinners as well. We'll be like recreating live some of the places that we go to on the time travel pub crawls, but probably not with vintage recipes. Yeah, Wendy, I bought a few bottles of the Z31, barrel Z31 of Jepson's Malort's, Jepson's bourbon. They're the same company that makes Malort, but they also make delicious bourbon, and barrel C31 of their single barrels especially, I absolutely loved. So I bought a few of them, and they last me a long time because I don't really drink that much. I'm drinking like this much over the course of the night. And Gregory, yeah, my favorite Heaven's Door is the rye, but their new 10-year bourbon that came out, I decided to splurge a little bit. So many of my friends are spending big bucks to go to Tulsa for the Bob Dylan conference. Got a lot of friends who've been offered to speak there, but they're not covering anybody's expenses. They're still making you register if you're giving a talk. I'll just spend my money on some bourbon. I might still feel like I have to go to Tulsa. So many of my friends are going to be there. Tasting notes for this one included toasted marshmallows. I buy a lot of bourbon. I drink bourbon regularly, but I don't drink very much of it at a time. Hey, Gregory, the rye is my favorite. The bourbon itself, at least the Tennessee bourbon that they had out first, was a little sweet for me, but it made a great Manhattan. And the whiskey, the double barrel whiskey, it's so woodsy. It's like you just bore a hole in the golden vanity with your tongue. Hey, Diane. But yeah, the 10-year bourbon they just put out is just delicious. I don't know, all bourbon is delicious to me. And that, like, spiced, warm butterscotch. Does Cafe Press have mysterious Chicago caps? I don't think so. I couldn't find a way to do them that I liked the way it looked. Are we doing a St. Patrick's themed pub crawl? Of course, we always have. Katie, what's this? I might have missed something about explaining what this iceberg is with historical facts.
The fate of a wooden Indian. That was the bugle call rag, Benny Goodman's own arrangement. Now, the popular tune, Thanks a Million.
Oh, they're dying the river the 11th? Yeah, we usually show that for a mini tour. But how can you not? People tune in for it. All right, Dad, way to go. Miles, look who just came to join us. Yeah. From folks who say lips that touch liquor shall never touch mine, kind devil deliver me. Well, we'll cover that one on a Gold Coast night. Oh yes, Priya is back sleeping on the chair over here, as you can see. Okay, Miles.
Down Harlem Way, they're all trucking. And here's Helen Ward to tell you all about her. Trucking.
Where the iceberg is about me? How is it an iceberg, though? Can you email me? Okay, it's a Gen V thing where it's a layer upon layer of facts that get more obscure the deeper it goes. And it's about me? Obscure facts about me? I was known as Adam the Shark Seltzer while playing soccer in 1988. That's pretty obscure. Miles. Here's the guy himself. Miles, say hi to CRO, who is waiting for you. This guy's been resetting my computer pretty regularly lately. I lost a lot of work on the Lost Vice District show. Because somebody had to be a brat, didn't he? Yeah. Yeah, I just saw Keaton's presentation about the Smart Alex Guide. Was that an iceberg? That probably wasn't an iceberg. I think Mary Roach is probably more famous than I am, maybe. Cairo is the punctuation? What kind of, like, the squiggly thing, maybe? Nicole, sorry. Yes, you missed some headless corpses. I should do a whole tour about headless stuff. I've been threatening to do that for some time. Keaton is running for president. He said Adam will be his cabinet of as the Secretary of History if he isn't already dead by then. Thanks, Keaton. When I was a little bit older than Keaton, I spent several lunch periods trying to get my friends to vote for me in 2016, which at the time seemed a million years away. And then Iowa Caucus 2016 came. Know how many people voted for me? None. But I went on Patty Vasquez's show on WGN and conceded. So, that's, going on national radio to cover up a 24-year joke. I figure that's pretty good. You all want the Headless tour? Okay. With a hip, hip, and a hippity hop, he's out looking for a top to chop. The Dead Ringers did that, didn't they? Hey guys, Eli's going to be in town in a few months. I haven't talked to him about coming on a couple of tours, but he'll be in town for a concert that's on a Friday, which means he'll probably still be around on Saturday. Be a very good day to do dinner. You describe one of your shirts as KFC core. Ooh. Burn. Okay, a Headless tour coming up after St. Patrick's Day sometime. Probably next month.
Eeny, meeny, miny, mo, and we stay right in the urban room of the Congress Hotel in Chicago and dance some more to Benny Goodman and his orchestra and hear Helen Ward sing Eeny, meeny, miny, mo.
Well, just like how many Headless stories I've already got. There's the Headless Corpse in Winnetka. There's Emanuel Swedenborg, which I could always do in more detail than I usually do. I could do George Frederick Cook in a little more detail than I usually do. The Headless Ghost of the Pullman Strike. But I find really cool stuff just typing Headless into the newspaper archives. I have actually been to Sleepy Hollow. One day I just took the train up the Hudson River line. When I had a morning off in New York, I went up to Sleepy Hollow to go see that old cemetery. Man, that was cool. Plus, I found a jack-o'-lantern in the street. It was spring. I found Washington Irving's grave up in Sleepy Hollow Cemetery, but nearby that is the old Dutch churchyard, which is the cemetery where that galloping Hessian was said to lie. There is a grave for Ichabod Crane on Staten Island someplace. And of course, Ichabod Crane was a fictional character, but is apparently named after a real guy who was not amused. Did I ever have a s'more with toasted marshmallows? Yeah. Of course, love them. Only way to do a s'more. Although I have done them in the microwave too. It's fun to microwave a marshmallow, just kind of expand. Yes, Elaine, I took a lot of pictures of the Headless Horseman street signs. By Tarrytown, officially, I guess. Well, it was Tarrytown for years. Then they had to change to Sleepy Hollow or something. For tourism, you know. Ichabod Crane. Ichabod. Ba 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 boo 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 boo. Fudge striped cookies, I could see that. What I used to do is I would get these chocolate graham crackers. I would smear them with peanut butter and then microwave a marshmallow with them to make a kind of a chocolate peanut butter s'more. That was really delicious. Of course, chocolate and peanut butter is like Nobel Prize worthy combination. I gotta show you guys the Polka records that my parents found me while out thrifting. First of all, we've got Bill Savatsky's I Can't Stop Doing the Polka. It's a literary technique known as apocopy, where they leave off the G's. Now, you gotta check out this dude's band on the back. See, you just know every one of these dudes has an awesome rec room with wood-paneled walls in their basement. It also has a singer on one song. This includes the Joliet Waltz, so it's of local interest, too. Also, the Baby Doll Polka. The Polkaholics do a good version of that. You are my baby doll. And, of course, we also got Steve Walchuk's Polka Party, which includes Musicians Come and Play and Beer Barrel Polka, both of which I know from the Big Joe Polka Show. This company also did an album called Frat House Favorites. Frat House Party. That could be interesting. And, of course, Stan Wolowick's Polka Chips. Which includes a song called All the Girls Want Me, and one called The Gay Young Widow. Now, so far I've only played I Can't Stop Doing the Polka, but I'm really kind of amazed by the high fidelity recording. I mean, like crisp highs, searing mids. Again, hell, this band's got 2 accordion players. So, like, that's pretty hardcore. It's like somebody to compare that to, like, Thin Lizzy or something. Oh, yeah, Jerry, Hell's Princess, the Belle Gunness book by Harold Schechter. That's probably as good a book as can be written about Belle Gunness. I'd like to do one, but I can't top that one. Harold's a good guy. Let's do polka instead of Benny Goodman? Surely nobody else has ever typed that sentence before. But alright, Benny is wrapping up, so that means it's time for me to wrap up. Once again, next week's tour will be Strange Tales of the Gold Coast. Its first outing since last June, even though it is one of my favorite tours. So everybody, thanks a lot for joining me. I will see you tomorrow for another morning mini tour, and on Friday for Find a Grave Friday. So, thanks a lot for joining me. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago Tours, telling everybody to stay safe and stay strong. And of course, if you can, ladies and gentlemen, remember to stay spooky. Have a great night.